Welcome to Chapter 9, the Confederation and the Constitution, basically the formation of the United States government during and then after the American Revolution. In the first section here, we're going to cover the pursuit of equality to creating a confederation. So you have Independence Hall there. This is where most of the things went on with the Continental Congress in terms of the Declaration of Independence, and then later forming the first national government in the Articles of Confederation there in Philadelphia. So, with the American Revolution, 80,000 loyalists left the country, mainly for Canada. It removed any of the strong conservative kind of backbone or views of this country. It also removed the aristocratic element of the United States. Anyone that put on airs and thought they were above people, and it kind of leveled the playing field even more, and this egalitarianism was kind of taking root here in America. All men are created equal. That phrase that Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence resonated with the new nation. People bought into it. And really tried to uphold its principle, contradictorily because there's still slavery in the South, but we'll kind of get to that here in a moment. Most states reduced the property requirements to vote. You could own less and less property and allowed more people to vote. More men were able to participate in government. People wanted to be called Mr. and Mrs. and not Lord and Baron and all those titles that we have. In fact, the Constitution later will have a congressional ban on giving titles, so you can't be, Baron of Silk Mesa or whatever you want to be. And then just going a little bit further, it's funny how language is influenced by this notion of egalitarianism, but people wanted to have a boss instead of a master. You used to have the master-apprentice, relationship, and then, that denoted that somebody was above someone, and so now it kind of morphed into the boss. The Continental Army, the officers formed an exclusive hereditary order called the Society of the Cincinnati. Cincinnati was an ancient Roman dictator who, legend has it, was plowing his field, and there was an emergency in Rome, and so he put down his plow or his garden tools, went and saved Rome, acted as a dictator, as a leader, and then returned back to his fields. They exalted George Washington, who did much of the same. He had left Mount Vernon to serve his country, first as a representative of Virginia and then as the general of the Continental Army, and then gave up his power. But being a hereditary order kind of made them seem elitist. And Washington, who did enjoy this at first, but when the public backlash against it, kind of distanced himself from the Society of the Cincinnati. Most people fueled with republicanism didn't like this group. They saw it as, aristocratic and putting on airs and whatnot. The de-Anglicized churches became Protestant Episcopal Church or were disestablished. Basically, they got rid of any of the Church of England things. They lost their ties to England. And then, the battle for religion was fiercest in 1786 when the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom, which was written by Thomas Jefferson and his co-reformers, basically kind of paved the way for the separation of church and state. A lot of places, the Church of England and the colonial government were one and the same. It stated that religion could not be imposed on anybody, and then each person decided his or her own faith, which is kind of one of the principles that will end up in the First Amendment. People always remember the First Amendment of the Constitution being freedom of religion, but it's also freedom from religion as well. You get to choose, and the government doesn't endorse a particular religion. And so Virginia was a little ahead of the curve there, since the First Amendment wasn't ratified until 1791. The Quakers, remember the people who believe everyone's special. You're special. Founded the first anti-slavery society in America in 1775. All the way back in 1774, the First Continental Congress called for a complete abolition of slave trade. The idea was if you stop the importation of slaves, eventually slavery would die out, and the peculiar institution, as Southerners called it, would eventually go away. And so they did grapple with this idea of, equality on one hand, and then yet you're owning people on the other. Several northern states went further and either completely abolished slavery or provided for the gradual emancipation for slaves. No state south of Pennsylvania abolished slavery or bought into this abolition of slave trade. It just the country was still too divided on that, and as we know, there's going to be a giant civil war over it. In terms of civic virtue, maybe something we need here in 2016, Democracy depended on the unselfish commitment of each citizen to the public good. You give up your individual desires and selfishness for the public good. You're not forced to do so. The government doesn't tell you to do so because that would be fascism. But you do it, out of the goodness of your heart because you care about society and you're a productive American. And then also there's this notion of the Republican motherhood that the mother, though politically not allowed to vote except for a little quirky 10-year thing in New Jersey where women could vote because of a technicality, the mother, was selflessly devoted to her family. And not only did she raise the children and take care of the house, but she taught her children these civic virtues of liberty and equality and opportunity. And, she was the backbone of the American dream. She was the keeper of the nation's conscience, and crucial to the survival of the nation by raising the next generation of patriots and free-loving Americans. So moms everywhere out there, thank you. Like I said, women had the right to vote in New Jersey for a while on a technicality, and that went away for about 10 years. And you have a lot of portraits to kind of reaffirm the Republican motherhood and this ideal. You even have the daughters of Daughters of Liberty. You also have the Daughters of the American Revolution. Some societies like this, and that kind of reaffirm this Republican motherhood. Another painting from the American Pageant book. Although the father, he looks like he realized he had too many kids. He's a little stressed out, I think. So in 1776, while the war is raging on, and we just declared independence, the Second Continental Congress called on the colonies to draft new constitutions. So basically, we're independent, you guys need to form your own constitutions, and then we're kind of work on some national confederation or alliance kind of thing going on. Massachusetts called a special convention to draft its constitution. Here's the Massachusetts State House, and they're in Boston, and then submitted the final draft to the people, where the people got to approve it. So very democratic because, New England has those traditions of town meetings. And technically, it's the longest-lived constitution in the world, longer than even the American Constitution, because that was ratified in 1789. Pennsylvania's was the most radical or liberal, for the to use their term, not liberal by our sense, not a lot of progressivism or free college like Bernie Sanders wants, but it reflects the revolution the most. All tax-paying men could vote, so they had much easier rules for voting. More people could participate in democracy. And people were proportionally represented in the assembly based on population centers and kind of a little bit forward thinking in terms of what the United States government would eventually be. As written documents, the state constitutions were intended to represent the fundamental law superior to the short-lived impulses of an ordinary legislation. But basically, this social contract wouldn't just go with the whims or the impulses of the people, or even in legislation, that basically they would hold true and preserve order. So the idea of a social contract, to kind of hit that home again from Hobbes and Locke, is that people give up their absolute freedom, and in return the government provides fundamental protection. In the Revolutionary era, capitals were moved westward as kind of trying to get people to move west and conquer the frontier in New Hampshire, New York, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. People often wonder, why is Albany the capital of New York? They were trying to get people to move there, trying to move it west, and kind of symbolic of this forward thinking, moving into the new frontier. While this is going on, we have some economic problems. Our states are seizing royal lands and then some of the loyalist property, and they're kind of gaining some money from that. Economic democracy preceded political democracy, and so we were very even in America at this time. Not a huge rich-poor gap, large middle class here in America during the American Revolution, and the boycotts and the war led to the birth of the American industry. And so out of necessity, a lot of our people here started making their own goods for the first time. Still, very, very shaky ground for the American country. Trade with Britain was limited because we're not in the empire. We don't have the exclusive club. We're not we don't have like a Costco card anymore to go trade at the British Empire and get free samples. I mean, who doesn't love raviolis when you're shopping for 32 gallons of mayonnaise? It's awesome. Trade increased with other nations though: France, Spain, the Caribbean. Prices skyrocketed and states were in debt from the war. In fact, a lot of people turned to selling stuff to the British because they can make a lot of money doing that during the war, which infuriated Washington. Sometimes he couldn't get the supplies he wanted because people were selling stuff to the British because they paid more, and they paid in gold, not paper money that was worthless here in America. Robert Morris, pictured here, was the financier of the war, who helped win the war financially. He financed it, a lot of his own personal finances, and then heavily influenced Alexander Hamilton, who would later become the first Secretary of Treasury, who kind of helped save our country from financial ruin. Robert Morris, who was a friend of George Washington, ended up in debtor's prison. You could go to jail for owing too much debt back then, which I think our government would be in jail right now if they had that still. That's probably why they got rid of it. The post-war economy was not very good. Many Americans were poorer after the war. The British flooded our country with cheap goods and tried to basically crush our American economy. Here's some tea negotiations going on in China. I'm not sure. We had some early trade with other countries. That's what's going on there. Forming a national government was pretty difficult. Especially a new type was extremely difficult. There's not really any examples to follow unless you go all the way to ancient Greece. There's a lot of philosophy and political rhetoric going out there, but it's hard to put into action. The British, like I said, flooded America with surplus factory goods in 1786, trying to crush our economy, much like OPEC has done recently in terms of flooding our country with oil, trying to drive oil prices down to hurt American domestic oil production, which has, it's hurt the oil and gas industry, especially here in Western Colorado, but it hasn't hurt the economy. It did hurt the budding industry of America. However, the 13 states were similar, and there were some strong leaders that were present, and eventually we kind of got through this little crisis here to form our first government. The 13 states were sovereign, which means they have the right to rule themselves. They all coined money, they all raised armies, they all founded tariffs, they all did all the little things that countries do. That's why they're called states. Nation states all across the world, England is a state, Germany is a state, Russia is a state. At one point, Maryland was a state, and New York was a state in the idea of a country. The Continental Congress was kind of operating on its own without a written constitution, without written guidelines, without a contract, and really was kind of in the unknown territory on what they should do. Finally, Congress wrote out the Articles of Confederation, which is America's first government. People forget that the Constitution has not been along since the beginning of our nation. So this is our first government, and it's our rebound government. You come out of a bad relationship, you come out of an abusive relationship, you look for the opposite. And so we had an overbearing, abusive, partner in Britain that beat us up, took our money, and told us what to do. So we look for the opposite. So our rebound government is totally cool, laid back, no real power, no semblance of tyranny at all, because we don't want anyone to have too much power, because abuse of power is what got us in trouble in the first place. And we did some crazy things because we were just so mad in our relationship. I mean, we dumped tea in the harbor and we killed people. I mean, sorry, Britain, you made us do it. Doing that convinced France that we were a real country. That and the victory at Saratoga, that we had a genuine government. So, hey, we're not just, just kind of making it up as we go, flying by the seat of our pants. And so France, and enabled us to kind of give some aid to us. It wasn't actually ratified until all 13 colonies did so in 1781. That's one of the fundamental flaws of the Articles of Confederation, was that all 13 states had to agree to get anything done in terms of ratifying or amending this Constitution. Western lands was the big problem, because like Virginia and Massachusetts and New York and Pennsylvania, they had huge tracts of Western land that they were going to sell off to make money. What do you do with them? And so that was a difficult sticking point for them. Finally, the states gave up their land claims and gave them to the federal government, or at least planned to at that point, which gave the federal government at least one way to make some money, which we're going to get here in the next sections. The Articles of Confederation, the federal government is handcuffed. They don't have power. They can't raise money. There's no taxes. There's no tariffs. All they can do is sell land. And so it's like I said, it's a rebound government. It's incredibly weak, but it kind of fills in the gaps until we can kind of figure things out. It did legitimize the federal government. It bred unity. It helped, get that alliance with France, and eventually we win the war. But after the war, this government has some fundamental flaws, which we will learn in the coming sections. So if you have any questions, write them in the comments. Hope you enjoyed this. Have a good evening.